In a shocking turn of events that has gripped global attention, thousands of Russian shipyard workers are now openly turning against President Vladimir Putin as the nation's once powerful shipbuilding industry collapses under financial strain. Mass layoffs, sudden factory shutdowns, and months of unpaid salaries have pushed workers to the brink, sparking rare public anger in a country where criticism of the Kremlin is often silenced. The sudden and unprecedented revolt among Russian shipyard workers has sent a shockwave through the country's political landscape, revealing a level of public dissatisfaction that the Kremlin has long tried to suppress. What makes this moment extraordinary is not just the scale of the frustration, but the boldness with which workers are expressing it. For years, industrial labor groups remained silent, navigating economic hardship with caution. But now, thousands are openly turning against President Vladimir Putin, and their voices are growing louder by the day. The hook lies in their message. These workers, once considered the backbone of Russia's industrial and military production, are no longer willing to endure broken promises and unpaid salaries. They are calling out the government for failing to protect their livelihoods, exposing cracks in the image of stability the Kremlin has carefully built. This unrest began quietly with whispers of delayed wages and minor protests outside factory gates. But when major shipyards near Moscow and other regions began shutting down operations, everything changed. Workers who had spent decades building the vessels that powered Russia's navy suddenly found themselves without income, without support, and without answers. Instead of the stability they were promised, they were left confronting bankrupt employers and a government that offered little but silence. Those once loyal to the state are now demanding accountability, saying they had been assured that industrial investments were strong and secure. The shocking truth, revealed only after layoffs began, exposed a sector drowning in debt, mismanagement, and sanctions pressure. As tensions grew, social media channels became the battleground where workers voiced their outrage. Despite Russia's tightening grip on the internet, videos of protests, interviews with dismissed employees, and recordings exposing hazardous working conditions began spreading rapidly. The Kremlin, typically quick to shut down dissent, struggled to contain this surge of public anger. Workers openly accused officials of corruption, claiming funds allocated to support industry had vanished long before bankruptcy was declared. Their demands are no longer limited to wages. They want transparency, reform, and answers from the very leadership they once trusted. The intensity of this revolt is a warning sign for Russia's political future. These workers are not dissidents, activists, or opposition figures. They are ordinary citizens driven to desperation by economic collapse. Their anger carries weight because it reflects a broader truth. Industries across Russia are feeling the strain and patience is running out. The hook is clear and chilling. If the workers who help build Russia's military power are losing faith, how long before others follow? This wave of frustration has become a symbol of a deeper national crisis, one that the Kremlin can no longer ignore or silence. Russia's shipbuilding industry, once a symbol of national strength and strategic power, is now facing a financial collapse so severe that even government-aligned analysts can no longer deny the depth of the crisis. The revelation that major shipyards are nearing bankruptcy has shaken both domestic confidence and international observers, raising urgent questions about how a sector so heavily tied to national defense could unravel so dramatically. The hook lies in the magnitude of the failure. These are not small private firms, but state linked giants responsible for building naval vessels, military hardware, and commercial ships that support Russia's global presence. Their financial downfall exposes a system overwhelmed by sanctions, crippled by supply chain disruptions, and weakened by internal mismanagement that has long gone unchallenged. This crisis did not emerge overnight. For years, shipyards struggled to secure imported components, replace outdated machinery, and maintain stable budgets. But the tightening of international sanctions accelerated every weakness, turning routine shortages into operational shutdowns. Shipbuilding contracts meant to strengthen the Navy were delayed by months, then years, dragging companies deeper into debt. Managers warned the government repeatedly, but the Kremlin's priority shifted toward war expenditures, leaving industrial sectors starved for essential funding. The result is a chain reaction: stalled projects, frozen salaries, unpaid suppliers, and growing insolvency. As money evaporated, companies were forced to halt production, triggering mass layoffs and compounding financial losses. What truly alarms political analysts, however, is that this collapse reveals the limits of Russia's economic resilience narrative. For years, officials claimed that domestic industries had adapted to sanctions, building new partnerships, and localizing production. But the shipbuilding crisis exposes a stark contradiction. Critical industries remain dependent on foreign technology and international financial networks. Without access to both, they crumble under their own weight. The situation becomes even more alarming when insiders report that some shipyards are operating at less than 30% of normal capacity, with massive backlogs no longer possible to hide. This is not a temporary setback, it is a structural failure. Inside the shipyards, workers describe empty warehouses, half complete vessels rusting on docks, and supervisors who admit privately that bankruptcy is unavoidable. Suppliers are pulling out, foreign partners have severed ties, and financial reserves have been drained to keep operations running for just a few months longer. The hook that grips global attention is simple yet powerful. If a sector as crucial to Russia's national security as shipbuilding is collapsing, what does that say about the broader state of the Russian economy? This unraveling isn't just an industrial crisis, it is a strategic warning that the pillars supporting Russia's power projection may be weakening faster than anyone expected. The announcement of mass layoffs sweeping through Russia's major shipyards marks of a turning point that few in the Kremlin could have anticipated. What began as quiet financial strain within industrial facilities has now erupted into one of the largest workforce displacements since the late Soviet era. Thousands of employees, engineers, welders, technicians, and support staff have been abruptly told their positions are no longer secure. In some cases, workers learned of their termination from internal leaks rather than official notices. The hook is undeniable. These layoffs are not happening in an ordinary corporate sector, but in industries critical to Russia's defense production and economic stability. raising concerns that the country's industrial backbone is beginning to fracture under prolonged pressure. For decades, shipyards near Moscow, St. Petersburg, and the Arctic military ports were considered untouchable. They were protected by heavy state funding and guaranteed government contracts, making them a stable source of employment even during national economic downturns. But this time, the safety net has failed as companies face mounting debts, halted supply lines, and rising operational costs. Senior management has been forced to take drastic measures. Entire departments have been dissolved overnight. Skilled specialists with decades of service have been told there is no longer money to pay them. What makes this wave of layoffs especially shocking is the speed and scale at which it is unfolding. It suggests not a temporary restructuring, but a deeper financial collapse that leaders can no longer conceal. The impact extends beyond job losses. Communities built around shipyards are now facing cascading crises. Local businesses that relied on worker incomes, cafes, transport operators, small shops, are collapsing under reduced demand. Families dependent on a single breadwinner are struggling to afford basic necessities. Parents are pulling children out of extracurricular programs, postponing medical treatments, and taking on multiple part-time jobs just to stay afloat. The psychological toll is just as severe, with many workers expressing a sense of betrayal after dedicating their lives to an industry they believed would always be protected by the state. What amplifies the political danger is the growing perception that the government failed to act early enough. Many workers believe the warnings were clear months ago, yet officials continued to assure citizens that the industry was stable. Now, with mass terminations underway, those reassurances feel hollow, fueling anger that is spreading far beyond shipyard gates. Social media channels are filled with testimonies from newly unemployed workers, some accusing the Kremlin of prioritizing military spending abroad over economic security at home. The hook that grips both domestic and international observers is the symbolism of these layoffs. When strategic industries begin to shed workers at historic rates, it signals that the economic strain on Russia may be far deeper and more destabilizing than the government has admitted. The economic pressure weighing down on Russia is no longer a distant concern. It is now a visible force reshaping industries, livelihoods, and the political mood of the country. The diversion of massive financial resources toward the ongoing war in Ukraine has left domestic sectors gasping for support. And nowhere is this impact more evident than in the shipbuilding industry. Billions that once funded industrial modernization, wage increases, and technological upgrades have been redirected to sustain military operations, leaving factories with outdated equipment, shrinking budgets, and empty supply chains. The hook is unmistakable. The very industries that help project Russia's power at home and abroad are now collapsing under the weight of the Kremlin's own strategic decisions. As the government intensifies its war spending, domestic priorities have slipped further down the list. Factories that once received consistent state funding now face months-long delays in payments. Industrial managers who previously boasted about strong government backing now quietly admit that financial relief is unlikely to arrive anytime soon. This has triggered a domino effect. Planned projects are abandoned, Ship construction deadlines are missed, suppliers refuse to deliver materials without upfront payment, and employees go unpaid for long stretches. Meanwhile, inflation is squeezing Russian households, making unpaid wages even more painful. Families already struggling to afford utilities and food are now facing unprecedented uncertainty as their main sources of income evaporate. The war's strain is not only financial, it has disrupted global trade routes, intensified sanctions, and limited Russia's access to critical technologies needed for industrial production. Shipyards that relied on specialized imported components are now unable to complete complex vessels, forcing them to halt operations or rely on inferior domestic substitutes that compromise quality. Engineers warn that certain projects may never be completed if access to foreign parts remains blocked. This operational paralysis deepens the financial crisis, pushing companies further into debt and forcing management to consider layoffs as the only remaining cost-saving measure. Political analysts are closely watching this economic breakdown because it reflects a larger pattern. The Kremlin's focus on conflict abroad is eroding stability at home. Citizens who once believed the war would not affect their personal lives are now confronting its consequences through job losses, shortages, and rising prices. Many workers feel abandoned, believing that the government has prioritized geopolitical ambitions over the welfare of its own people. The hook that captures global attention is the emerging realization that Russia's internal economic foundations are weakening at a pace that even the Kremlin struggles to disguise. Every new budget cut, every postponed wage payment, and every factory shutdown highlights a deeper truth. Russia's war-driven economy is beginning to strain under pressures it may not be able to withstand much longer. The Kremlin now finds itself confronting a wave of public anger, unlike anything it has faced in recent years. And what makes this moment so volatile is not just the scale of the frustration, but its source. These protests are not coming from political opposition groups, activists, or foreign influenced circles. They are emerging from ordinary Russian workers whose livelihoods have collapsed under the weight of industrial failure. Despite strict censorship laws, tightened surveillance, and aggressive control over media narratives, the voices of shipyard workers are breaking through the cracks of Russia's information barrier. The hook lies in the sheer visibility of their rage videos of workers confronting managers, demanding unpaid wages, and calling out government officials are spreading across Telegram and local networks faster than the state can take them down. This growing unrest is a direct challenge to the Kremlin's long-standing narrative of national stability and economic resilience. Officials have repeatedly claimed that Western sanctions are ineffective, that Russia's industries are thriving, and that the country has adapted to global pressure. But the reality documented by workers tells a different story, one of empty factories, halted production lines, and families surviving without income for months. As more workers speak out, the government's ability to maintain a controlled narrative is weakening. Even pro-Kremlin commentators are struggling to dismiss the growing chorus of complaints without appearing completely out of touch. The Kremlin's usual strategy, denial followed by blaming external enemies, is no longer working as effectively as before. Workers are pushing back against these explanations, arguing that poor management, corruption, and misplaced financial priorities are the real causes of the crisis. Many claim that promised government support never arrived, leaving shipyards to collapse under mounting debts. Others accuse local officials of hiding the true scale of the layoffs to avoid political backlash. As these testimonies multiply, frustration turns into defiance. The government's attempts to censor criticism appear almost futile when thousands of affected workers are sharing their stories simultaneously. This intensifying public dissatisfaction poses a serious political threat because it undermines one of Putin's strongest pillars of support, the belief that he provides economic stability even during conflict. Workers now say that stability is a myth, and their anger is beginning to resonate across other industrial regions facing the same financial pressure. The hook that alarms political experts is how rapidly this frustration is spreading. When essential industries collapse and public trust erodes, even the most tightly controlled political systems can begin to shake. The Kremlin can silence reporters and opposition voices, but silencing thousands of hungry, unemployed, and abandoned workers is a challenge it may no longer be capable of managing. Political analysts are sounding the alarm, warning that the collapse of Russia's shipyard industry is not an isolated economic failure, but a symptom of a far deeper instability spreading through the country's political and financial systems. Their concern is not merely about the present crisis, but about what it signals for the future. The hook is striking when a sector as strategically vital as shipbuilding begins to fall apart. It exposes vulnerabilities that Russia can no longer mask behind propaganda, military displays, or economic claims of resilience. These analysts argue that the shipyard collapse is pulling back the curtain on a fragile economy, one that has been stretched thin by war spending, weakened by global isolation, and eroded by years of mismanagement. What makes the situation more dangerous is the timing. Russia is already under intense international pressure, facing sanctions that have crippled supply chains and limited access to global finance. At the same time, domestic costs are rising, unemployment is ticking upward, and public frustration is becoming harder to suppress. Analysts point out that Russia has relied heavily on its industrial base to project strength, both militarily and politically. But with that foundation cracking, the nation now faces a cascading risk. Economic decline could fuel social unrest, and social unrest could trigger political instability. They warn that once workers in one major sector openly challenge the state, others may soon follow, creating a momentum the Kremlin may struggle to contain. Inside Russia, political insiders are quietly acknowledging that the government's traditional tools, censorship, propaganda, and strong messaging, are losing their effectiveness. The anger spreading across industrial regions cannot simply be brushed aside as Western interference or media manipulation. It is grounded in lived reality: job losses, unpaid salaries, rising prices, deteriorating working conditions. Analysts emphasize that this type of dissatisfaction is far more dangerous for the Kremlin because it comes from the very citizens who once formed the backbone of Putin's support. These are not elite critics or opposition figures. They are factory workers, technicians, and engineers whose loyalty was built on economic stability and national pride. When that stability collapses, loyalty begins to fracture. The most alarming scenario raised by experts is the potential ripple effect. If shipyards, steel plants, machinery factories, and energy linked industries experience similar financial strain, and many already are, the Kremlin could face simultaneous crises across multiple economic fronts. This would stretch government resources thin, intensify public anger, and challenge the narrative that Russia remains strong and self sufficient. The hook that captures global attention is the possibility that this industrial breakdown may be the first sign of a long term political shift inside Russia. While no one can predict how far the instability might spread, analysts agree on one point: the shipyard crisis has exposed vulnerabilities that the Kremlin can no longer hide, raising questions about the sustainability of Russia's economic model and the durability of its political control. As tensions rise, global observers are watching closely. Could this wave of economic frustration grow into something larger? Could it challenge the carefully constructed image of stability the Kremlin tries to maintain? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain: